Did you know that Magda Goebbels, the high-profile wife of Joseph Goebbels and First Lady of the Reich, attempted to flee Nazi Germany with her 6 children for neutral Switzerland in the spring of 1941? But why would she attempt to do that? What drove her to such a desperate move? At this time, Hitler had a lot on his plate. The planning for the invasion of Russia, Operation Barbarossa, Rudolf Hess's unauthorized flight to Britain, Mussolini's military disasters, and the ongoing struggle for dominance in the Mediterranean. Amidst all this chaos, an unexpected crisis was brewing in Germany's ruling class. Why, Magda, why? Are you ready for some salacious Nazi gossip? Only thing is, this isn't gossip. It actually happened. Frau Goebbels, the blonde, attractive, and vivacious spouse of Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, was often regarded as the First Lady of the Third Reich. She was like the German Jackie Kennedy Onassis of her day, a clothes-horse princess of Nazi-style haute couture, with the added benefit of her husband's complete control of the media. Some have said of Magda Goebbels that she was the First Lady of the Third Reich, given that the Führer was a steadfast bachelor and betrothed to the state and the people of Germany. She may well have been, but she certainly had her rivals, such as Emmy Göring, Hermann Göring's actress wife. Eva Braun was another, but she was kept purposefully out of the spotlight as it didn't serve Hitler's purposes if it became common knowledge that he had a mistress. At the time Magda got involved in Hitler's inner circle, it was the end of the 1920s and the start of the new decade, the 1930s, when the Führer was having his clandestine affair with his half-niece Gaily Raubal back in Munich. Hitler also met Eva Braun around the same time when she worked as a lab assistant in the atelier of Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's official photographer. Magda, before she became Frau Goebbels, was one of these wannabes. Fast forward to the heady and dizzying Third Reich times. There had to be a Madonna figure in the Nazi firmament, and some say Magda filled those shoes in an unofficial capacity, even as Frau Goebbels. So, let's give her the ribbon in the I'm the most ardent Hitler fan sweepstakes. Hitler had a messiah complex, and he knew the value of keeping himself unmarried to retain the aura of appeal and marriage eligibility for countless masses of German women whom he counted on for support. Check out the old newsreel of Hitler on the balcony of the Reich Chancellery in July of 1940 after his triumph over France. The ground-level view of the adoring masses is quite amazing. Check out the excited expressions on the women's faces. They were ecstatic, some even rolling their eyes in an otherworldly trance. The SS crowd control was impotent. It's like the NYPD out on the streets trying to stem the tide of people when the Beatles appeared at Carnegie Hall in New York in 1964. A kind of can't-keep-the-fans-back insane Beatlemania, only it's the crazed Nazi version of a hard day's night. See, that was what the Third Reich was all about. Deceit, role-playing, actors on a stage set, operatic drama, Sturm und Drang theatrics, death cult pomp, hot air balloon bombast, bellicosity, and a cast of millions. Very Wagnerian, some might say. But I digress. Back to Meet the Fockers. They were an odd couple, Magda and Joseph, wouldn't you agree? A statuesque German Brunhilde with a sinister-faced oddball dwarf. It's like Nazi Beauty and the Beast, and yet they were man and wife. It gets even more twisted. Let's do some background digging. Magda Goebbels, before she was Frau Goebbels, came from a refined high society background. She was born out of wedlock to Augusta Behrendt and engineer and developer Oskar Ritschl in 1901. They married later the same year. Later, in Third Reich times, the illegitimacy inconvenience was revised to the couple being married before Magda's birth, despite the evidence saying the contrary. The marriage didn't last. Her parents split by the time she was 5. Magda was sent to Brussels to stay with Ritschl, who promptly enrolled her in an Ursuline convent to be educated. Already at 5, she was being prepped and groomed for the life of a high society lady. August then married a Jewish businessman and leather goods magnate, Richard Friedlander, and moved with him to Brussels. In 2016, it was reported that Richard Friedlander may have been Magda's biological father, his residency card found in Berlin archives stating that he was the biological father. It's possible. Augusta, Magda's mom, may have had an affair with him before she married Ritschl. However, another source supports the view that he only adopted Magda when he married her mother after she divorced Ritschl. In Nazi Peyton Place, All My Children soap opera sub-drama, again, like all diggings into backgrounds and histories of Nazi luminaries, there's always some skeleton key to a closet of dirty laundry. Here are the piss stains and skid marks in the Nazi underwear, in Magda's case, the question mark of possible Jewish paternity, just like the possible Jewish paternity that Adolf Hitler fretted over in his lifetime as to the origins and birth of his dad, Alois Hitler. There's never been a smoking gun in either case, so the uncertainty remains. Speculation runs riot in explaining motivations in behavior. I only mention this because the cornerstone of the Third Reich was its rabid anti-Semitism. There was always an "I'm more Aryan and German than you" competitive, obsessive, or insecurity streak coursing through Third Reich history among all the Nazi bigwigs. It verged on paranoia, everybody keen on proving their Germanness and fanatical loyalty to National Socialism and the Führer. The ideology encouraged this kind of sycophancy and unquestioning deferment and obedience to an authoritarian figure like Hitler. It's there in spades among all the Nazi top brass, many of whom were just ass-kissing mediocrities. Anyways, the Friedlander family lived in Brussels until the outbreak of World War I, when Belgium's neutrality was violated by the invading German army, and German nationals were advised to leave, lest there be violent repercussions from the Belgians. The family moved to Berlin, and Augusta divorced Friedlander in 1914, and Magda was at war's end enrolled in the prestigious Holzhausen Ladies' College. She was about 19 or 20 at the time. She was still being groomed to be a high society lady, perhaps the wife of an industrialist or a diplomat. On a train ride to that school, Magda met Gunther Quandt, a wealthy industrialist twice her age. He was smitten and decorously and chivalrously courted her with grand gestures. He proposed marriage, and they tied the knot in 1921, her first child, a son, Harold, born the same year. She was only 20, and already into the marriage she soon grew frustrated and bored as Gunther Quandt spent little time with her, apparently preoccupied with business matters. She was also left to care for 6 children while running the household, her own son Harold, 2 of Gunther Quandt's sons from a previous marriage, and 3 children from a friend who had passed away. But she soldiered on. There was a trip that lasted 2 months long to the United States in 1927, while Gunther conducted business. In 1929, Gunther discovered Magda was having an affair, and there was a separation followed by divorce the same year, with a very generous financial settlement. At loose ends, Magda attended a Nazi meeting where the keynote speaker was Joseph Goebbels in 1930. He was Gauleiter of Berlin, and she was quite impressed with his speech. This was before the Nazi seizure of power. She joined the Nazi Party in 1931, doing volunteer work, but wasn't particularly politically active. She still had the social connections to the wealthy elites, though, because of her marriage to Quandt and her earlier history as a Friedlander and a Ritschl. In search of a purpose, she moved to the Berlin Nazi Party headquarters to become personal secretary to Joseph Goebbels' deputy, Hans Meinhausen. This put her in the orbit of Joseph Goebbels, who soon asked her to become his secretary and handle his private papers. Yeah, I know it is hard to believe, but Joseph Goebbels was a lecher, the Harvey Weinstein of his day. He had a roving eye for leggy and attractive women, and he made his moves on Magda. They became romantically involved during a short trip to Weimar in February 1931, and by April, they were making plans for a wedding. Joseph Goebbels was already by then a committed Nazi and faithful acolyte of Hitler's. Magda's flat in Berlin's Reichskanzleiplatz district became a favorite hangout for Hitler when he was in Berlin. He, too, soon grew fond of Magda, and for a brief period, this caused some friction as Joseph grew jealous of Hitler's attention to Magda. Magda by this time was fast becoming an ardent admirer of Hitler and a supporter of his cause. She may have had serious romantic leanings toward Hitler, but with Hitler's steadfast refusal to marry, she settled for second best to ensure that she continued to be a part of his retinue of female admirers. She married Joseph Goebbels. Hitler, as hard as it is to believe these days that he was a ladies' man, as the Third Reich's most eligible bachelor, had a whole panoply of bride wannabes and female fans. During the heyday of the Third Reich, the Reich Chancellery was inundated with female fan mail. The jealousy triangle suited Magda just fine. She forwarded the wedding date and married Joseph Goebbels in December 1931. Hitler was the best man, and he encouraged the union, seeing the value of her social elite connections and upper-class credentials. Goebbels was pleased that he had a trophy wife, and initially he was quite enthused in marrying her. What a catch. Magda. What she got out of it was that in being married to a high-profile official in the Nazi Party like Goebbels, she retained continued access to the bachelor Hitler and was able to step into the role of unofficial First Lady of the Reich. She was the perfect embodiment of all that Nazi ideology preached about a woman's place and role in the Volksgemeinschaft. The slogan that most reflected this was Kinder, Küche, Kirche, or Children, Kitchen, Church. Between them, the Goebbels parented 6 Aryan children for the Führer and the fatherland. Their names were Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun. These sweet innocents would later be murdered by their mother in the Berlin Führerbunker, but that's another story. Joseph Goebbels, before the Nazi seizure of power, was an aspiring but failed author. He was well educated and achieved a doctorate, but for all his education and literary pretensions, he failed to sell his written works, and his career went nowhere. When the Nazis came into power, Hitler rewarded Goebbels for his efforts by giving him total control of communications in Nazi Germany. Newspapers, books, theater, publishing, films, music recordings, and radio. All the tools and means to saturate the minds of the masses with Nazi ideology and propaganda. It was the Nazi nerd's revenge. Goebbels took quick action against anything Jewish or suspected of Jewish influence and banned everything. There were book-burning pyres all over the educational institutions of Germany. Goebbels presided over all of them. He gloated and sneered and ranted in the flicker of flames. The Nazis' first victim was the truth. Its first bastard child was the lie. And one of the lies perpetrated was the propagandist image of Joseph and Magda Goebbels and their 6 children as the first family of the Third Reich. For the film cameras and the photographers, the couple and the family presented themselves as loving and closely knit, very devoted and caring, the ideal of Nazi family values. The truth was that after the cameras and photographers disappeared, Magda and Joseph detested each other. I've already told you how Magda may have only married Herr Doctor because it kept her in the Hitler inner circle. Adolf was her real crush, and Adolf reciprocated the feelings, but only to a point. There was no consummating it with a tryst or anything like that. But Leni had better taste in men. She had no time for a clubfoot dwarf with a rat face. She rebuffed Goebbels and earned his spite for that, if it wasn't for Hitler, an ardent admirer of Leni and her work. Goebbels had to toe the line. I don't know if Herr Doctor was well endowed, but he had a voracious sexual appetite. He was always on the prowl for sexual conquests, and he bedded ladies left and right, all on the down low. There was no Nazi Hedda Hopper who could expose him, nor was there a Nazi equivalent of the National Enquirer. Magda knew of his infidelities, but tolerated them as she wore the infidelity shoe on the other foot. She found time from rearing her brood to have a torrid romance of her own. She had an affair with Karl Hanke, a young, tall, handsome man, who was an SS lieutenant colonel and served as one of Herr Goebbels' aides. The Goebbels marriage simmered for a long time under the deception of being a happy marital union. Things heated up to a boiling point when Joseph Goebbels fell head over heels in love with Lida Barova, a beautiful Czech actress in 1941. He carried on a hot romance with the star, unlike anything he had ever had previously. He gushed over her like a drooling pug. What Lida saw in him was just a leg up in the world of movie acting, one assumes. Here we are, that year 1941. Magda started to chafe under the marriage conditions. At a Nazi gala, she burst into tears and confessed to the Führer that she found her marriage intolerable and wanted to divorce the Herr Doctor. Hitler was flabbergasted. It just wouldn't do to have the first family of the Reich torn asunder. What a scandal. What bad press. He had already had to disassociate himself and repudiate Rudolf Hess. Now, this. He took direct action. He ordered Joseph Goebbels to ditch Lida Barova. She ended up being exiled by Hitler's orders to Prague. He ordered Goebbels to fire his aide, Hanke. Hanke took the honorable way out by volunteering to go to the front and fight. Good Nazi that he was, helping the Führer to defuse a potential time bomb of scandal and ill repute. So, Magda and Joseph got back together again. In Berlin society circles, it became known as the Great Reconciliation. But it was all just keeping up appearances. The truth was that Joseph and Magda hated each other even more. He was still madly in love with Lida. She was inconsolable over the absence of her lover, Karl Hanke. Finally, Magda couldn't take it anymore. One day in the spring of 1941, she piled her kids and herself into a car, and she drove south towards Switzerland, intent on fleeing Germany. Goebbels got wind of her flight and put out word that she was to be stopped. And stopped she was, just short of the border with Switzerland. She was promptly arrested and flown back to Berlin. What on earth was Magda Goebbels trying to do? Why did she choose Switzerland? Switzerland was a beehive of espionage and counter-espionage. The Allies had more spies per square yard operating in Switzerland during the war than at any other time. Was Magda planning on defecting? What would have happened had she made it across the border and delivered herself into the hands of the Allies? She would have had to deliver herself to them in order to avoid Nazi retribution. What a propaganda coup that would have been. As a high luminary in the Nazi universe, would she have provided the Allies with valuable information? Could she have been in on the know of Nazi plans like the imminent invasion of Russia? Was her true motive in fleeing just to get away from an intolerable marital situation? We will never know because she was caught short of the border, and then 4 years later she would murder her children and end her own life with her husband in the gardens of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin.